Okay. Yeah, so we started with that clip of a castle siege because today we're talking defense in depth. And just as the attackers had this whole plan, right, defenders had their own plan. The attackers had to get through a rain of fire arrows. There was the physical wall and gates of the castle, and then there were the actual defenders that were there. Even if they do break through everything, they have to actually get through to the defenders. And defense in depth isn't a super bananas crazy only cybersecurity concept, right? It's everywhere in pop culture, right? From like anime and Attack on Titan to this movie clip here. It's nothing super new, but I do want to kind of give us the vocabulary so we could talk about defense in depth with regards to cybersecurity. So let me just give me 1 second here so I can see people. And it doesn't let me see people. That's fine. All right. So let's talk about what we're going to talk about here. We're going to talk about the controls that we as defenders use. We're going to talk about the different layers where we can set up these controls, kind of building ourselves a mental map of our defenses. And then finally talk about the failures and assessments, because this is always an iterative process, right? We are always going to experience failure and breaches, and it's up to us to, improve from them and improve our defenses constantly, because it's always a cat and mouse game. So before I move on, someone tell me, what is a control with regards to cybersecurity? What is a control? Dwayne, thank you for volunteering. What's a control? What do you think of when you think of a control in cybersecurity?
Something that you have control of, or some type of mechanism, like tools. I don't know. I'm just thinking of anything that comes to mind because
All
I really
right.
don't know.
Tools, mechanisms that do what? What do you think they control?
What you have the ability to, I guess, like from a defender standpoint, your tools that help you, the tools you're in control of to help you defend, or
Okay.
on the attacker side, tools that you have to help you breach or get inside or
We're on the
whatnot.
right
Things
path
you have
there. I want to hear from someone some of the vocabulary that we've already been using from these past couple of days. What is it that we might want to minimize? So these controls are going to minimize something for us. What are they going to minimize?
Risk.
Yeah. So a control, just flat out, super broad, anything that's going to help us avoid, detect, counteract, mitigate risk, anything that does that. And like everything we're going to try and do in Blue Team and cybersecurity, we're going to follow the rule of threes. And there are three main types of controls. Can anyone list the three main types of controls? It's okay if you don't know them. I know I'm here. This is how I remember them. And you just Google cybersecurity, and it's in every single poster, right? It is the ones and zeros, the lock, and the men or people in suits. You'll find it in every single cybersecurity poster, at least most of it, right? I'm assuming this person's probably wearing a suit too. But pretty much in every cybersecurity poster, the three controls that you'll always have throughout cybersecurity are the ones and zeros, the locks, and the people in suits that you trust. If there's a guy in a hoodie, it's bad. All right, I'm obviously joking, but the types of controls that we have are all related to that, right? So we have two different kinds, two different ways we can describe these controls. We have ways we can describe them based on how they work, and ways we can describe them based on when they work. So let's talk about these first controls based on how they work. We have administrative controls, aka the people in the suits, I guess, right? The things you trust. So can anyone give me an example of an administrative control? What's an administrative control? And I guarantee you all know of some.
Is training included in that?
Yeah, absolutely. Right. Training your users, training your staff so that they can use technology, so that they can use it safely. Absolutely. That's an administrative control. Let's drill down and be more specific. Any other specific administrative controls that you might know? If you worked in other industries like finance or law, I guarantee you've had some or some that had had to be implemented. Who can
Like
tell me of some more?
how we create like users, like the procedures to create users, and I guess remove them if needed.
Yeah, that may be an administrative control. If you have procedures specifically for how we onboard, like say you're an organization, you may have procedures for how you onboard new employees, right? How do they get access? It's probably something slow and over time. So administrative controls are the people, the people in the suits, right? So I think of personnel security controls, like where you're allowed to go and when. I think of things like separation of duties. So if you worked in finance or law, oftentimes, maybe you have the authority to sign a check, but someone else has the authority to actually approve it. So in order for one thing to happen, a check to get to go through, two people need to do two separate things to make it happen, right? So there's a separation of responsibilities or duties. There's dual control, which is like, if you've ever seen one of those like 1980s Cold War movies where they're going to arm a bomb and two people have to like both put a key in at the same time at opposite sides of the room and turn it, right? That's similar to separation of duties, but here you have two people that have to do the exact same thing for something to happen. Other administrative controls I'd like you guys to be thinking of are things like succession planning. You know, someone leaves the organization, who's going to take their spot? In addition to that, you have like cross-training your employees. So again, there's overlap between succession planning, but employees should be super generalized, right? So that they can do more than one thing. You have background checks. That's an administrative control. If you plan to work for the DoD, they're absolutely going to do background checks on you. If you worked in finance, mandatory vacation time. Did anyone ever have to take a mandatory vacation time in their previous work? Why might an employer mandate mandatory vacation time?
I would say they're doing it to control some sort of cost or whatever it is they're projecting for their quarter or the particular time.
Not generally. I
don't think so.
I mean, that may be a reason, right? They force employees to take vacation time, but more often it's so that you have someone checking their work, right? Oftentimes, if you're the only person in finance there's no one checking over your work and you never go on vacation, right? You could be embezzling funds. And so in finance, this is pretty common where you'll have to take, 2 weeks every few months or something like that. And someone else has to do your work and take a look at your accounts just to make sure everything is on the up and up. In addition to administrative and onboarding controls, you have termination procedures. I'm trying to think of, there was definitely a few episodes in Mr. Robot that focused on some of the termination procedures that the characters had, like losing access before they actually know that they are being terminated, right? So no one disgruntled finds out they're getting fired and then just like burns the place down before they actually lose access. So all of those sorts of things, everything under that umbrella of people, that is administrative controls. Okay. Next up, we have full screen that. Except we got physical. This is, in all of those posters, this is the lock. What are the physical controls? Here's some example of physical controls. I'm sorry, broke up a little bit.
Security doors and guards.
Security doors, man traps, the actual locks, everything that's in the physical realm that's stopping people from getting access to something, that's reducing your risk. These are physical controls. That's how we'll describe them. And then finally, we have the ones and zeros, right? The technical controls. Who can give me an example of some technical controls?
Passwords. Firewalls.
Did you say passwords?
Yeah.
Yeah, passwords, firewalls, antivirus, encryption, hashing, all of those sorts of things fall under technical controls. So in order to remember them, right, one, we have the rule of threes for everything because Blue Team is all about stories. But also we have every single cybersecurity picture. You got the people in the suits that you trust. You got the locks, right, that physically keep us safe. And you got the ones and zeros, the technical controls. Okay, so these are the how we can describe the controls. We can also talk about the when for controls, right? We have preventative, detective, and corrective. So give me an example of some preventative controls. Liz, can you give me an example of a preventative control?
I'm not sure.
Not sure. What do you think preventative means? Or at what time do you think something's happening for preventative?
Well, preventative is to protect.
Right. So all of these are going to protect us, maybe some after the fact. But when in an attack is a preventative thing going to help us? Or if you want, you could think back to the video that we watched in the beginning. Could you think of a preventative control there?
Not sure.
In that
Like
castle
policies?
siege. Could be. What could be a preventative policy?
All things like IDS, IPS, or firewalls.
Do I like, is that a policy? Is that a policy? I'm not sure. So who can help Liz out here? Give us an example of a preventative control from the clip that we saw in the beginning. What's preventative control? I'm sorry, broke up a
I
little.
mean, I was just going to say, but
The gate? Is that what you said?
Yeah.
Yeah, I would agree with you, right? It's literally preventing them from getting inside, right? Any preventative control, we're just talking about when this happens, when this control takes effect. And so it's preventing these enemies from getting inside. So a wall would be a preventative. So what's the digital analog to a wall? Digital analog. What's a digital wall for us then? That'll be a preventative control.
Firewall.
firewall.
Exactly, right? A firewall is going to block stuff from coming in. And if you have that control preventing something bad from happening, then it would be a preventative control. I want you guys to think of these two ways of describing the controls, the how and the why, as like X and Y coordinates, right? You're both, right? Both things. A firewall is a technical control and it's also preventative. Right now, Liz mentioned a IDS and IPS. So I think Frank said yesterday, both of these things, there's a lot of overlap, and you'll definitely see a lot of overlap. So an IPS, an intrusion prevention system, absolutely, that would also be a preventative control. And Liz also said intrusion detection system, right? Anything that can detect when you've been attacked, right? That would be a detective control. So if you had scouts that were, detecting enemy movements, right? That would be a detective control. By the way, when we have these intrusion detection systems, anyone have any idea, rough estimate, how long before an organization generally realizes they've been breached? If you had to take a guess, how long do you think it takes an organization to realize they've been breached?
Probably maybe a couple weeks.
Couple weeks? Yeah. Try on average 100 days. So like 3 months people have been in your systems before you realize they've been in your systems. And that's on average, right? So when we talk about detection, we're talking about finding indicators of compromise, finding, whoa, there's maybe hacking tools in our system. Why are they here, right? Someone bad must have brought them in. Right. So when we're talking about these detective controls, it's not like right away we find them in their system. We found, it's like if you go home and you find, a glass window broken with the glass coming inside, right? There's an indicator of compromise that someone's inside now, except in a network, it takes, upwards of 100 days before you even realize that someone's inside and they may be doing things. But anyway, that would be detective controls, finding those indicators of compromise and detecting some kind of presence. Then finally, we got the corrective controls. Can anyone list out what a corrective control might be? Dill, thank you. What's a corrective control?
Would it be like patching up vulnerabilities?
Patching vulnerabilities. You find out that there is a patch and you correct it, right? You patch yourselves up, you update your security. I will argue, and I'm sure if you find other security people, that patching is also preventative. However, in the CISA explicitly, it has patching as a corrective action. So just make sure you note of that when you're taking the exam. But I will say, you talk to 2 cybersecurity people, you'll get 3 different opinions. So just be aware of that. All right, cool. Any questions on how we can describe controls? Cool. So let's move on then. So we have this image inside your textbook. There's a whole bunch of these, like this chapter is very graphic, I think, which is kind of nice. And so again, it's this whole idea of thinking about our defense in layers, like an onion or something. And inside each of these layers, we have the different places where we can place our controls. And so in the innermost layer, we have data security. Can someone give me an example of what types of controls you might input to protect data?
Data loss prevention.
But will you put that specifically on data? I'm talking about ones and zeros. How are you going to protect ones and zeros here? What do we know that we can do to protect ones and zeros? To protect their confidentiality and integrity?
Do you encrypt it?
We can encrypt it. And how can we protect the integrity as well?
Hash it?
Yes. Yes, right? We can encrypt those ones and zeros during data when it's at rest, and we can encrypt it during transport. And we can use hashing, right, to ensure that there is no loss of integrity in our data. On the application level, what do we think we have? What defenses can we put at the application level? What things do you think might be there?
Is this where you would put the passwords?
It could be, yeah, right? If you're logging into a particular application, right? Let's say I'm logging into a WordPress site. There's passwords for that WordPress site. So absolutely. You could have specific application firewalls. Web application firewalls can live here. On the next level, endpoint system security. Firstly, what's an endpoint? We talk about these things in cybersecurity. What is an endpoint? Michelle, what is an endpoint?
Michelle is not here this morning.
She's not here this morning.
She's under the weather.
That's okay. How about Don? What's an endpoint?
Does it have to do with, I don't know, I guess the user?
Say that again?
Does it have to do with the user?
I agree. I do. Tell me more.
I don't know. That's all I have. Sorry.
All right, we'll come back then. So it's something with the user. Let someone else add on.
I
What's
was
an
just going
endpoint?
to ask, does it have to do with the point in which whatever is trying to be received is received, or the point in which the destination?
I kind of like that.
It's the devices on the network. So like if you've got a large network, the last person in the last office with the computer on their desk has an endpoint. Like if their cell phone is on the network, it's an endpoint. So it's the devices attached to a network.
Yes, absolutely. Great answer. Short, sweet, to the point. Thank you, Chris. It's all the devices. This is where the users interact with everything. This is potentially one of our biggest surface areas of attack, right? Because this is where the users kind of live and can, you know, muck everything up for us, right? Like, we love the users because without them, there would be nothing for us. But at the same time, they're one of our biggest areas of attack. So here we would have training of the users of the endpoints, but also we could put up firewalls on the endpoints, right? We can put data loss prevention sorts of things on there so you can't exfiltrate data. We can put things like physically blocking USBs from going in, right? Why might I physically block USBs?
Someone could have malicious software on a USB or a reverse shell.
Absolutely, right? And this is not even uncommon. This is a known type of attack. Have we heard of a USB key drop? What is a USB key drop attack?
I guess when somebody just drops a USB either in a building or a parking lot of an organization, and I guess somebody unknowingly picks it up, I mean, probably tries to input it into their computer.
Absolutely, right? This is, have people heard of Stuxnet? I can't see people, so I don't know if faces are going up, but if you have not heard of Stuxnet, is perhaps one of the first cyber attacks that actually caused physical destruction of Iranian nuclear enrichment facilities. There is debate as to who actually built this malware, but it is known the way that they got it into these power plants or to these enrichment facilities. As you can imagine, the enrichment facilities, or at least the centrifuges that spun up uranium, were not connected to the network. So how do they get their malicious payload in? Apparently they put the software on USBs and dropped them in parking lots outside of this plant, and someone must have taken it and plugged it in. You should be very paranoid if when there's conferences again and people give out USB keys and all sorts of things like that, right? That is like, don't put those in your machines, right? You never know where they're coming from. So these are sorts of things you're thinking about with endpoint security, right? You can put firewalls on them, but it's all the devices that the employees are using, right? All of these endpoints. You can also throw encryption on here, right? You can have full device encryption and such like that. Network and perimeter security, I'm going to lump together. But what types of things will we have for network and perimeter security, do you think? What type of security controls will live there?
Probably like access controllers maybe in the network, or like network access controllers who can access our network.
Possibly. I think there's some good, there's a good image of some of this in the textbook. What might we put on the perimeter of our network?
Firewall.
Yeah, exactly. We put firewalls everywhere, right? Just because you can put them on the application or on the endpoint doesn't mean you can't also put them on the entire network. What else? What else might we put up there?
Segment the network, like different parts of the network.
Segment the net. We can split the network up. What if we have some areas like has anyone seen Attack on Titan? Maybe that's anyway, they have this city built with surrounding walls, and essentially that's the idea with segmenting the network. We have more secure stuff with a wall around it, another wall around it, and then we'll have an outer area that's less secured. Right? So really the whole idea is that it's not bananas. It's just putting more and more layers to protect ourselves. Okay, this image is great. Let's move on. So we've got physical. Again, these are just going to be examples, right? Under physical, we have all of these things here. Under the network, here are the things I wanted to make sure we hit. So firewall, segmentation, DMZ. What's DMZ? I think Frank asked this yesterday. What's a DMZ?
it's an area within that's outside of the network, but it's part of the network. So it's anything coming into your network, but it's outside your network. So if it's anything malicious, then it's able to block it.
Yeah, it's like an exposed part of our network, right? Somewhere in the middle sort of thing, right? To protect the hosts that are most vulnerable to attack. That'll be more inside. Cool. We have jump boxes. We have NIDS, which is just a network intrusion detection systems, web proxies, VPNs, network access controls, right? All of those things would be under network. And then finally, we have the host controls. All of these things I want to make sure we're clear on because I think that they get asked in CISA. There's firewalls, of course, throw firewalls everywhere. Host intrusion detection system, right? That's what HID stands for. TPM. I know CISA asks about this and it's in the text. It's a trusted platform module. This is a physical chip that you use that will authenticate essentially the hardware that you're running. On top of hosts, we have passwords, right? In order to get onto the machine, get onto the endpoint, you need to log in. You have some password. And additionally, we'll have multi-factor and some kind of logging, hopefully, as well. So just examples of all of these things that live here, each of these sections. Oh, and under software, of course, secure coding, having code reviews, having security assessments, making sure that inside the software, if there's any user input that gets taken, that we sanitize it. We make sure we don't just take user input and throw it into our systems. Cool.
For host, would it be like a computer?
Yeah, host think, you can think of endpoints. Host machines or endpoints.
Gotcha.
Right. So you see this image, I think it's also in your book. It's all over the place. But again, it's this idea of thinking about defense in depth as these layers, and each layer is going to have its own unique holes in it. Your job in constructing a security posture is to set up these layers such that all of the holes don't go through. If you have all of the holes go through, these cascading failures, which result in a failure of maintaining your CIA. Right. So this image is just everywhere. I want to make sure we see it because again, this is a very visual day. Okay. We have 4 models of layered security that the book goes through specifically. We're going to talk about them. We're going to go through them, and then we're going to kind of blend them all together because in the real world, it's not generally just one of these models. So there's uniform protection, and this is where you just treat everything the same. Right? We're just going to protect everything. Everything is going to be behind this one firewall, for example. We're all going to have these same settings. And this is useful when you potentially have small networks, don't have very much data, right? The advantage is this is easy to manage, right? Everything's the same. It's easy for me to manage. Then I don't have to worry about different layers of security. You have protected enclaves. This is where you have some data that needs to be more protected than others. For example, if you work in a bank, some of the data is more private than other data, right? So that data that's more private, that might have credit card information and accounts and all sorts of things, personal information, might be on a different part of the network than where all of the other business happens, right? So that will be a protected enclave. Different from uniform. We have risk or threat-based model of security. This is where, like what we did on Monday and Tuesday, you find and analyze and figure out what are your risks and threats. And based on those risks and threats, that's how you decide what we're going to protect and what needs higher or lower levels of protection. And then finally, you have this information classification-based model of security. This is more common, I guess, in like military organizations where you have like secret, top secret, and classifications based on that. So whatever the information is, if it's rated a certain classification, that's how you're going to protect it. Doesn't necessarily matter what the risks or threats are. It's just it's this label, so this is how we protect it. There's advantages and disadvantages to each one, but in the real world, it's a blend of all of these things, right? You're never going to find just an organization that's just using one of these models. It's always going to be something in between. That said, I do know that the CISA asks specifically using this terminology, so it's important that we understand what we're talking about when we talk about these different models of security. Does anyone have any questions on these models? Okay.
What would be a disadvantage for having a uniform protection?
For having uniform protection?
At like the highest level. So like you just secure everything the same exact way, but just at a really high level.
That is a great, so we'll touch on this when we talk about failures, but it causes issues. So you secure everything down. One, it can increase costs, right? Security is expensive. If you're buying more security packages from vendors, right? So what are the disadvantages of uniform security? Cost, for one. If you have something that's very secured, that means the security for the most secured thing is what's going to be is how you're going to secure everything else. So costs can rise very rapidly. Two,
Matt?
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was just going to say, as an example, you used the bank earlier. Like, if I need to use a name and a password to find the bank's locations and hours, how is the bank going to get any additional customers, right?
Exactly.
There has to be some amount of it that's public facing that people can get to, right?
Yes, that's a great example. Thank you, Chris. That's a great example. Uniform, it works, but it does not scale. If you have a very small network, right, this is something that might make sense. But as networks grow, you're going to realize, hey, this data needs to be more protective. And so slowly from uniform protection, as the organization grows, potentially you might go into a protective enclave. Or as your organization grows and realizes there's risks and threats specific to the organization, maybe we'll change how we store the data based on that, right? It really depends on the situation. But I will say uniform protection, the things you want to know about it is it doesn't really scale very well. It's only useful in smaller networks. Good question though. Okay. So let's talk about these failures. We have two different kinds of failures. We have single points of failure where one thing goes wrong and it causes everything else to go wrong. We have cascading failures where one thing goes wrong and that causes other things to go wrong, and those things cause additional things to go wrong. So the example I always use for a single point of failure is helicopters. They have a particular nut that keeps the rotor attached. And if that nut were to fail, the whole rotor falls off and the whole aircraft will fail. Cascading failures would be something like, if anyone is in the Northeast in, was this 2000, when was the 2003 or 2004, I want to say? There was a 2003, that big blackout in the Northeast. I know there were supposed to be settings such that if the demand grew to a certain point, there would be overflow or something like that. And these systems all failed, and it caused cascading failures, and the demand just continued to grow and grow, eventually taking out the entire electrical grid for, I forget exactly how long, but it was I mean, people still remember it after all these years, right? So that's the example of a cascading failure here. Additionally, what I want to talk about are how we can view these different architectures. Right? So there's three different ways that I want us to be aware of as we're viewing them. There's the operational ways of viewing architecture, which is, and by views of architecture, I'm talking about literally like kind of maps of how to imagine your security. So there's the operational way, which is kind of looking at how the data flows through your network, right? Data's going in here, it's going out there. Where is it going, right? Following that. You have the technical way of viewing it. So this is the details of all of the technology, configurations, source code, right? All of that stuff will be under the technical view of your architecture. And finally, we have the logical view of your architecture. And this is all system design or network diagrams. Like there's a good few examples inside the book. Those are the logical ways you can view your architectures. Okay, so let's talk about a couple of the stories here of failures. The biggest one that I want to share with you guys is, I think, this one. Yes, this one. And I'll share this with you. But here's an article from University of Pennsylvania, Dartmouth, and SoCal, essentially on doctors that are running into issues with patients' digital security. So the few things I want to talk about here are all of these physicians. I don't know if anyone knows of any physicians. Used to be back in the day, they'd have like clipboards so that they could go and get patient data. And they'd kind of have those around. And now things have moved on to a lot of doctors will have iPads or stations like this. And the IT people will try and keep the data safe for their patients by requiring that in order to access, right, this endpoint, you need to put in some kind of password, a secure password, so you get access to particular patients' data, right? Maybe you don't have access to every patient's data, only your set of patients. Right? And you can imagine that these health professionals sometimes run into roadblocks as they're trying to get patient data. And so this article, I think it's only about 7 pages or so, details some of the ways that these physicians end up becoming black hat hackers in a way to, get access to this data. And it really just goes to show that, like, we are in service of them, right? Like, we have to make sure that all of these controls that we put in, we don't just have our users going around them. So I do want to show you guys this lovely image right here that they got. Desktop shortcut found on abandoned PC from the medical practice. Here you got shortcut to login and passwords right there on the machine. So these are important things to keep in mind as we're setting up these controls, right? We cannot make it so hard that our users or the people in our network just go around us, right? Again, that's something that's important to note. And this is something that has been discussed in industry. So I'll share this with us as well. And is there anything else I want to share? I think I also want to share this NIST 853, which details security and privacy controls. This is, again, one of those large NIST standards. So I would just encourage you to bookmark it so that you have to review. There's really, I think it's about 80 or so pages, but it's just the abstract, and I forget where it is in the beginning. There's some useful information to just kind of review, so you have an idea, right? So have an idea of what NIST is talking about here, because this framework is pretty much used internationally. I know there's an ISO framework as well, but that is a paid framework. This one is used internationally, even in Europe as well. So I'll also link that. This is NIST 800-53. Okay. So we have human failures. Cool. Any questions on any of this or comments? Okay. So let's go into our summary then. So we have different types of controls and defenses, right? The controls are our defenses. Anything we use to mitigate our risk for us, that is our control. And really, the big takeaways from this lecture are the different ways we can define controls, right? The vocabulary that we're learning. All defenses have holes, right? Every single defense we put up has holes. There are, what I like to say, especially so in Blue Team, is there are no solutions, there are only trade-offs, right? And this is what we always have to be thinking of here as we're designing our defenses, right? And we also have to think about what types of failures we can expect, right? If we lock up things way too hard, people are going to go around us, right? This is part of user training, and it's part of understanding the demands of the organization, right? I think that when you make it too hard for physicians to access this, right, we're having them make this decision where I need this information to save this patient's life, or I needed to like protect this data, right? We have to understand what are the needs of the organization we're working for, and how do we best serve them for the confidentiality, the integrity, and the availability. And I think that's about it. That's really all I have for defense in depth to tell you guys. So let's stop that.